Dr. Glenn Stokes is professor of biology and arrived at Columbus State in 1983. He earned a B.S. in zoology from the University of Rhode Island and a Ph.D. in physiological ecology from Penn State. At the beginning of our conversation, Glenn tells us about an unfair advantage he enjoyed as a college student. Well, thanks, Glenn, for coming in to spend some time.
Glad to do it.
This program is kind of about behind the scenes of teaching and learning and what it's like to be a university professor. Okay. So one of the things I think our students might always be curious about is what their professors were like as students. So you went to college at University of Rhode Island.
That's where I started out, yeah.
What were you like as a college student?
Well, I'm kind of lucky because I didn't have to study much. I mean, I have, it's not a photographic memory, but it's close. If I read something, I can remember it almost word for word after that. I'm a very slow reader, which is painful for me. But once I read something, it's pretty much there. So I could read the textbook one time and highlight things, and I could read through my notes one time, and that was about all the studying I ever had to do. It seems unfair, but because of that, I had a lot more free time than a lot of people. So,
and what did you do with your free time?
Well, like most people, I went to a lot of the athletic events. I really enjoyed that. URI had an excellent basketball program, so we did that. They had a pitiful football program, and we'd go down and be one of three people probably watching the football games most days. When I started out, we were in an all-male dorm as a freshman, which was kind of an interesting experience. We would play street hockey in the hallways. We played a game called Killer Frisbee when we had a little spare time. We would go outside and watch people streaking. That was really big back in those days. So, just enjoying the whole college experience.
Yeah, that's Killer Frisbee.
Killer
Sounds
Frisbee.
Like the sort of all-male dorm activity.
It is. And it was a brand new dorm, or they had just finished rehabbing it, and they to save the dorm the next year, they actually moved women in, and we actually had. And it was every other room, male, female, male, female.
To save the dorm?
Yeah, to save the dorm. And they thought that would calm us down, which it did, as you can imagine. And we actually had co-ed bathrooms, which was kind of a very 1970s thing.
Yeah.
And they held on to that for about, it was unofficial. The university didn't sanction it, but they didn't stop it either. And it stayed that way till probably the late 80s.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very swinging.
Oh, yeah, it was. Yeah. Yep.
So you were a biology major?
I was a biology major.
And at what point did you think about going to grad school?
Ooh, boy, yeah. To be honest, it was probably getting into my senior year. I started wondering, what should I do beyond this? I thought about medical school. I actually applied to a few medical schools, and I applied to a few graduate schools. And, just mostly graduate, not to any particular program, but schools I had heard were strong in biology. And, it almost fell into it. Had made a decision. My father had told me that, once I was done with undergraduate, the gravy train ended there. So it was a matter of finding some place that had some money for me.
Yeah.
So I could afford to go.
Did you have some good faculty mentors as an undergrad?
I did. Surprisingly, not my faculty advisor. I mean, everybody kind of made it a habit not to visit their advisor if you could get away with it. But there was a histologist who I got along with very well. And surprisingly, there was a Spanish faculty member, a faculty member in the Spanish department who I was kind of close to and spent a lot of time talking to, just to get an idea of what it was like to be a college professor.
Yeah, so you kind of cast a wide net.
And
followed some opportunities.
Yeah, I got two calls, one for University of Vermont and one from Penn State. Bill Dunson, my major professor at Penn State, he played it pretty smart. He said, I'm going to give you a week. He said, I got money for you. This is how much it's going to be. This is what you're going to be working on. something in this area, but you got to let me know in 7 days. And the other schools, most of the other schools I had applied to, hadn't even finished processing the applications yet. So, that back up against the wall, but at the same time, it was some pretty interesting research he was doing. So, I thought that's where I'll go.
That's great. So you went straight into your graduate program.
Yeah.
And you did all the way through to your PhD then.
Yeah, I started out in the master's program, and my major professor, Bill Dunson, he was very interested in all of his graduate students getting actively involved in writing grants. And so in my first year, he had me write a grant for developing a membrane to remove salt from water to the U.S. Department of the Interior. There was a water resources department. And it was like $140,000, which paid for an addition to the research I was already doing. And my committee at the time said, well, this is too big for a master's degree. Let's skip the master's and just work straight for a PhD. So I was there for 4 years. And got my doctorate.
That's great. And your field is physiological ecology.
Yes.
And so I looked it up on Wikipedia. It's so interesting.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, for a layperson, how would you describe your field?
It's the way an organism changes the way it does its life business in relationship to changes in its environment. For example, if you were to travel to Colorado, go up 10,000 feet, air gets thin, it gets dry. What is it your body does to, we say acclimate or acclimatize to that new environment? And so you look at the way the body operates to do it.
So not just over evolutionary time, but literally like adapting to the environment on the spot.
Yeah, and it's sometimes within minutes, sometimes it takes days, and sometimes weeks. But
well, so you're just the person for me to ask this question, which has arisen recently. For those of us who have been now living in Columbus for long enough to really become southern bodies, would it be unwise to take a vacation to a really cold Arctic destination and think that you would be okay?
No, I don't think it's unwise. I mean, your nerves tend to become more sensitized. They have found that, like, if you spend a long time in cold environments, your cold sensory nerves become, adapted to that or acclimatized to that. But generally speaking, that's a very simple process. Your body's kind of designed to adjust very quickly to changes in temperature. You can redistribute blood flow, and shivering, for example, is a very quick response to getting too cold. So no, that wouldn't be violent. So this
whole theory of your blood becoming thinner or something, nothing to that.
No, there's nothing to that. No. The blood's viscosity, the thickness of the blood's the thickness of the blood. It's going to be the same no matter what. That's got more to do with the ability of the heart to push the blood through the vessels. There's an ideal thickness to distribute enough oxygen and nutrients.
Right. Awesome. Little practical.
No, go ahead. Take a ski trip. You'll be fine.
Well, I was actually considering a sled dog adventure. Wouldn't that be cool?
That would be.
But yet I'm a little afraid.
Nah. I mean, it's easy to insulate. I grew up in the Northeast, and so I'm here to tell you you can always put on more clothes.
This is true.
It's easier to adapt to northern environments because you can always put on another layer. You get down in the South, and you can just strip down so many layers, and then people are going to tell you to stop.
Well, so making the potentially intimidating or esoteric concepts from your field connect to real life and experiences that your students would be familiar with must be one of your strengths in the classroom.
It really is. It is fun. That's a nice thing. And I'm a physiological ecologist, so I deal mostly with vertebrates, animals with backbones, apply a little bit to invertebrates. But the nice thing is, because you're a vertebrate ecologist, almost everything you talk about somehow can relate to humans. And so if you can relate it to their own body, even in passing, it kind of intrigues them a little bit more. It gives them something to connect to, something to associate with. Or you talk about their dogs, or you talk about the snakes down at Oxbow, something they can see and kind of understand what's going on.
So when the sex, drugs, and rock and roll biology section got developed, was that your idea?
Actually, no. I started teaching that my first year teaching when I was in Georgia College over in Milledgeville.
Oh, yeah.
Now Georgia College
In State University.
in State University.
Yeah.
But I started teaching it over there back in the early 80s. And it was a course taught by a guy named Ken Saladin, who's still there. He and I were hired. He was hired a couple of years before me. But he was teaching a similar class, not exactly the same. He got tired of teaching it, asked me if I wanted to take it over. And I taught it as a very small seminar type class. I only had 12 students. And it was a lot of group discussion. You try to get comfortable with the other people so that you have an open conversation about the process. But then when I came here, it grew. The smallest group I think I've ever had was 24. The biggest was probably 150 I had in the class. Now, if you're fielding questions, and people are going to have a lot of questions on almost everything in that topic. So it's tough to get a conversation going with 150 different ideas.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I mean, by all accounts, you're just a fantastic teacher.
Oh, thanks.
The students, you found the sweet spot where the students find your course rigorous and they like it anyway. You know, I mean, that's pretty... It
is, and I try to warn students up front because sex, drugs, and rock and roll is a fun class. It really is. And we talk about some really out there topics. But at the same time, it's got to meet the same core learning objectives as any other core biology class. And so it's got to cover basic cell biology and evolution and chemistry and scientific methods. So there's a lot of learning associated with it, but at the same time, the students are usually pretty interested.
Yeah.
I don't have trouble with attendance most times.
Yeah. Well, would you say over, your years of teaching, there have been turning points where you tried different approaches or made your way towards the things that work for you?
Boy, I would say the biggest thing for me is if it's a topic, first off, I have to be comfortable with it. If you're trying to learn at the same time they're trying to learn it, which was a lot of that was the beginning of my career, it's kind of intimidating because if someone comes in and they've read something and they're one step ahead of you, that can get intimidating and embarrassing. So that's important. It's got to be something you're really excited about. And I mean, my biggest challenge is slowing myself down because when I start talking, this semester I'm teaching two of my favorite classes, and I just get going, and it's, I realize I'm sweating. I'm so excited about the topic, and I've tried other techniques. I've tried things like I taught online for a while. Didn't like that at all. There's absolutely no connection with the students that I can see. And I like to interact with them. I like to get feedback. I like to ask questions and see what they're thinking, where they're going. I think there's probably an ideal class size that you can get some discussion going, but still teach a significant number of students. I taught a class with 213 last semester. That wasn't the ideal.
No.
You lose contact with everybody in the last 6 or 7 rows.
Wow. What room was that in?
That was in right next door here at Stanley 203.
Oh, wow.
And it was designed by a guy who built several of the old movie theaters in town. And when you go in there, you can see that it is a movie theater. It's got the exact same makeup. And it's got all the acoustical problems of a movie theater. And you've disconnected. A movie theater is supposed to be dark. And so it's a very dark room. You can't see the people in the back. The people in the back get kind of disconnected. So.
Oh, yeah. And often they've sort of chosen to sit back there so they can disconnect.
Right.
So it's a terrible downward spiral.
Yeah, and the biggest challenge in that one is the ones, because they feel disconnected, it's kind of like in their living room. They'll break out their cell phones. I had complaints one time. Students were saying there were kids watching a football game on a tablet and talking about it, and I can't hear them down front. I can't see them because it's so dark. So I've lost that connection. Now I walk up and down the aisles and as I'm lecturing, just try to keep everybody involved one way or another.
Right. Isn't it interesting, though? I mean, I totally relate to what you're saying about the early years when you're still sort of deepening your own knowledge, and there's nothing to do about that than slog through it, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah.
But what gets easier for me is not that I'm doing the same thing over and over again. I think sometimes the general public thinks, well, you've taught that class once, and so now it's in the
yellow
can,
notes,
right? And I mean, I would kill myself if I had to do the same thing every single time. I never do the same thing every single time, and I always make sure to include something that I wanted to know more about, so that I'll have the excuse to to find out, to think more about it, read it again, but what gets easier is just you're so much more comfortable with your own knowledge and expertise because you've just accumulated so much, time thinking about it and reading about it, and that makes it easier.
And the other thing is, and with tenure, you don't have to worry about getting fired, which is kind of nice. But I'm not afraid to say, I don't know. That's a good question. I'm going to look that up, and we're going to come back and talk about that next time. And I do a lot of that. Sometimes I'll say, okay, let's look at for me, the basic physiology. How does it work not in that special situation? So how would it work in that special situation? And we usually get pretty close, get the students kind of guessing what might happen, and then step aside. I mean, one time said, are there anything, it's big right now. So people said, are there vampires? And that's a great question. It turns out, yes. That vampirism probably originated from people suffering from porphyria, which is an inability to produce part of the hemoglobin in the red blood cell. They are sun sensitive. They have trouble with their eyes on the sun. They are anemic typically. They crave iron-containing things because they're not, generating enough hemoglobin. A lot of those things that we associate with people who are vampires might have been porphyrics, and then of course superstition added on top of that.
Yeah.
Developed a whole culture around it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
It's fun that, again, it gets back to kind of a confidence and comfort level for you to be able to say, hey, I never thought about that. Let's look into it, and then engage everybody in kind of, figuring this out together.
Right.
It makes the whole atmosphere feel purposeful,
And I've also learned not to get embarrassed by questions, or at least not to show it. In sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you get a lot of freshmen, and they think I'm gonna get the faculty. I'm gonna embarrass. I'm gonna ask a really embarrassed. And I won't give you examples of it, but it's just you get those questions. You just say, okay, well, let's think about it, and you turn it into science, and it's kind of like they're still interested.
Yeah.
But it kind of deflates the ego of that one guy who's trying to take control of your class.
That's always a toughie. Well, I have sort of an amusing little anecdote because my oldest son took your sex, drugs.
Oh, did he?
That's
right, he did.
He did. He was here just for a semester. And so he would come home after class and, plop down in the chair, and he'd have, all sorts of interesting things to, share. And one day his announcement was, hey, Mom, don't buy any of that anti-aging stuff over the counter, because Dr. Stokes said it doesn't do anything.
Work. Nope.
And so, of course, my reaction was like, really?
Yeah.
Oh, what else did Dr. Stokes say? I was like, woo, inside secret source. Dr. Stokes knows all about the cosmetic industry.
Not all about the cosmetic industry, but I know the biology behind what they try to say. And they use familiar words. Mm-hmm. They read an article and they say, okay, I can bend that to what I want. But that's been the nature of science forever. Is you can take a little bit of knowledge and really exploit it. Yeah. And that's one of the things I like to do, especially in that class, is to say, okay, here's what you're going to hear about. They talk about anti-aging, and there are some things. I thought that's one of the first things I tell students. There are anti-aging compounds out there. One of them is food preservatives. As bad as people think they are for you, BHT, BHA, ethoxyquin, all of those things slow the aging process. They can't reverse it.
Because they slow cell growth? Or?
No. What they do is they are antioxidants. Yeah. They bind up the chemicals that destroy your proteins and can attack your DNA. And by removing them, they act as kind of like the sacrificial lamb. They throw themselves into harm's way and keeps your cells more healthy. And so, And, why does a Twinkie last 20 years?
Yeah.
Same thing. It's the anti-aging of Twinkies.
Yeah. I'm not sure how I feel about turning my body into a Twinkie.
No, there was a guy who actually came out with there was a cocktail that you could make yourself that was a combination of all these different antioxidants, food preservatives, and that kind of stuff, vitamins, many of which are antioxidants, and that's how they help you. And he looked pretty bad. A little bit of something is good for you. Too much of it can kill you. And it wasn't helping him at all. But.
Well, so some of the teaching that you've done on a different note has been in study abroad.
Yes.
this next part of our conversation, we heard about a typical day in study abroad. Kangaroos, lions, and snakes, oh my. You took students to Africa.
Africa, Australia.
And Australia. You went with Birkhead,
Yep.
Is that right?
Birkhead and I took a group of 20 to Australia.
Yeah.
We took just a few, I think 5 actual registered students to Africa. We periodically take a group to Andros in the Bahamas.
Right, yeah.
It's the biggest of the
That's a huge program.
Yeah, it's a big island, but it's the least populated. It's the least impacted. It's got some nice reefs, and so we take students. So we were going every year. We go at least every other year now, and it's expanded. Other faculty members doing different things on the island.
Right.
But yeah, it's great opportunities.
Well, and you know, the criticism I think of study abroad programs in general, because we come back to campus and everyone says, "Wow, well, you were in Australia." You know, is that it's sort of a thinly disguised vacation for faculty. I mean, what would be your answer to?
Yeah, I'm kind of infuriated about that too, because we had an administrator who actually referred to it as vacation, and the faculty shouldn't get credit for it. You try to go to a foreign country and keep track of 20 students, all of whom need to follow local laws, culture, need to keep track of their finances, maybe feed them, keep them out of trouble. That alone is enough of a responsibility not to consider it a vacation. But when we work with our students, we usually get them up around 6 in the morning, and we start with the morning program. Very often we'll eat in the field. We have an afternoon program. We'll come back, we'll have dinner, and then we have class time in the evening. You know, we actually have been criticized for not giving the students enough downtime. But if you're going to go to one of these environments, I mean, how many opportunities are you going to have to get to the Serengeti in Africa? Yeah, we're going to use every minute we can get. Yeah, when we're there. Yeah.
It's a completely different kind of learning, and yet so powerful to be right there.
And the thing is, it's different and it's the same. The nice thing about it is we can point out, you know, the dramatic differences. Obviously, you go to Africa, you see these huge mammals and you know, the different fauna and flora. But on the same token, you can find places in the U.S. that have very similar habitats, and you can find the correlated species. You know, when you look at the bisons and the wild horse and that type of thing, and say, okay, how does that correlate to the same organisms you would see in Africa? You know, who is serving the function of the white-tailed deer? Well, in Australia, it's the kangaroo. And the kangaroo is the white-tailed deer. And so you make those connections. You try to point those things out.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So their learning is, I like to think of it as maybe being deeper as opposed to broader but more superficial.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the thing is, but, you know, with biology, like I said, you can focus on one small habitat, one small group of organisms, but then you can apply that to almost everything. I mean, and you know, there are common links: chemistry, physics, the cellular biological functions, those type of things. That's everywhere, and worldwide, it's all the same. So.
Yeah. Well, I know, you know, the students who, at this point, there are still only a small percentage of CSU students who are able to do study abroad. Always are, you know, really glowing in their you know, experience, their recollections of what they learned and their experiences. But it's a tough problem to try to encourage students who might not think of that as something they are I don't know, comfortable with doing. There's the affordability aspect.
That's a big part of it.
It's a huge part of it, which the grants are really help making.
Especially with the new fee. I think that's great. And I think, you know, any student that complains about having to pay that fee should turn right around and take advantage of it. I mean, we are one of the leaders in the university system, certainly, in international travel, international study. And so there are lots of opportunities. I think biology, of course, everybody ought to do biology, but I mean, there are several other disciplines that are doing some great programs through the study abroad. So everybody should, and you can't worry about it. There are differences in cultures and differences in food. I mean, we've had students, we've traveled with them, and they thought the food was so different. They brought jars of peanut butter with them, just so they wouldn't go hungry. Well,
Yeah.
the foods aren't that different. Most countries are very either European or Western or capable of doing Western type of cooking. And so.
Yeah. Well, it's great. I mean, all of that is also part of the life skills that they get from doing it. Well, on the side of crafting policies, for example, to encourage students to study abroad, I have witnessed you argue for really smart academic policies. For example. Thanks. On the other hand, I've also seen your smart recommendations get sort of compromised or watered down, or and you've had a lot of experience in different administrative roles over the past decades, including chair, dean, Senate exec,
associate dean.
Yeah. So, I mean, how do you what do you think makes an effective administrator?
I think, for one thing, what's really important is that you've got to understand the perspective of the people you're serving. I mean, I think, and it's kind of sad, it's been this way forever, that whenever we've had the best faculty members, and people have identified them as the best faculty members, and because of their willingness to work and their ability to interact with people, we always wind up taking them out of the classroom and make them administrators. And I've always thought that the best faculty members make the best administrators. I also think the best administrators are the ones that go reluctantly. When you've got someone who comes in saying, I want to be a college president someday, I always get a little suspicious, mostly because I'd rather they say, I want to make a great educational experience for somebody, maybe being college president is the way to do it, So I think, that's sort of a good source, but you can't go searching for that person. They're the ones that usually fall into the role. And to be honest, I've only ever applied for one administrative position I've ever had, and that was when I was dean of the College of Science. All the other ones, I was there. People said, would you be willing to be chair of psychology? Would you be willing to be chair of nursing? We think you can bring something to computer science. Would you be willing to be chair for a year? That type of thing. But like I said, I think having the faculty perspective and looking at it from that direction, and because you're on that side, when you recognize something that is a good policy that people might be resistant to, you have a way of convincing them of the positive nature of it and why it might be the best way to go, as opposed to just saying, I've decided that this is the best way to go. I want everybody behind it 100%. If they don't see the value to it, you can't be surprised when they're not going to get behind it and support it.
Are there role models you can think of people you watched do a good job, like somebody who leads a good meeting or somebody who handled personnel decisions really well, or were there people who you sort of watched?
Two different sources for that.
Yeah.
Okay. For the people I watched to be good administrators, probably the first administrator that ever hired me, Dave Cotter over in Milledgeville. But he was a very down-home, I'll support you on whatever you need to do type of guy. But there are limits to that. You can't always support your faculty members. Sometimes you've got to be on the other side. But then when I came here, Bill Lenore and George Stanton were probably two of the people that I really associated with closely for that type of administrative role. Their ability to deal with people, to empathize and sympathize with people's situations, but also their willingness to make the hard decision, just say, I'm sorry, in this case you are wrong, and this is the way we're going to go. For running meetings, the NCAA.
Oh,
I
wanted to hear more about that.
I've been the faculty athletic rep. Funny story how I became the FAR. I was walking across campus one day, and Frank Brown, who was president at the time, was walking with Herb Green, who was the athletic director, and they were coming in the other direction. And the man who had been the FAR had just died, and he had been our only FAR, really. And so they said, we need a new one. And as they're coming across the bridge towards Lenore Hall, I heard Herbert say, oh, there's Glenn. He'd be a great one. He'll do it. And Frank Brown had this endearing way of asking you to perform service. He'd say, Glenn, have I got an opportunity for you? And, it's like, uh-oh. Yeah. And so that was back, it's been just over 20 years, 21 or 22 years ago. And then a few years after that, other FARs nationwide, we get together, we have a meeting every year, and started encouraging us to get involved in the national organization. And so I served for 10 years on the membership committee, which makes decisions about what schools are going to get into the NCAA, and then basic policies for staying there. And then after that, I served on the Division II Management Council, which is the oversight board for all of Division II NCAA. Those people in the NCAA know how to run a meeting. They know how to stop or prevent unnecessary conversations going on during the big meeting when you should just be making big policy decisions. A lot of small committee work with reports out. Get your ducks in a row before you walk in. Don't get in there and say, so what do you want to do today? You go in there and say, here are 3 options. Which one looks the best? If you have an alternative, let us know. But this is what we're looking at, and this is why. And so it was great. And I hate to say it, but almost everybody that works at the NCAA has a law degree. Most of them have not sat for the bar. They weren't interested. Most of them wanted to learn how to work in a policy-driven organization. And since it's a non-profit type of organization, it's structured very much like we are. It's run, people think the NCAA is a thing, and it's not. I hate to admit it, but a lot of those bad policies that people hate, people like me that made that decision. It wasn't the NCAA, it wasn't the coaches, it was college administrators and faculty that decided the BCS was the way to go, and ranking football programs. That's where it came from. But
so it's sort of a consortium of people who meet periodically.
Right. And it was, I really enjoyed my years, especially on the management council, because it's a group of people I would never have had the opportunity to work with otherwise. Athletic directors, coaches, commissioners for athletic conferences, people who just look at problems differently. But it was a group that was absolutely dedicated to making the best learning environment for student athletes. That was always first in any discussion, is what's best for the student. Okay, now. Okay, let's work some athletic policy that helps out the athletic competition as well.
It's so interesting that it would potentially be that culture would be shaped by a legal background.
I know.
I know.
Well, again, these are lawyers who weren't interested in fighting legal battles. They were interested in process.
Well, that's
and how to make things work best, how to look at the whole. And they're heavily invested in Robert's rules, as you can imagine. They run a meeting. So that's the way. When I was executive officer of the Senate, I kind of modeled that process of we need to get our committees reporting. They need to be doing the work. We don't need to be doing the work here for that 2 hours once a month.
It can get out of hand easily.
Yes, it can. As you know, because you did it for a few years yourself.
On really, unimportant issues that are a big waste of everyone's time.
I know.
But, so in terms of the NCAA work, what do you see as the special challenges of looking out for student athletes or athletic programs? I guess I would imagine a common perception of them is that they're already sort of a special, protected, given special favors class of students.
You would think that, but the NCAA legislation absolutely prohibits that. And it's a point that I make to this. I meet with the students. So we try to meet with all the teams every year. And for example, if a coach is driving a golf cart across campus and comes across one of their student athletes walking across campus and says, "Can I give you a lift?" And the answer is no, because you cannot, as a representative of athletic interest is what they call it, you cannot provide any benefit for an athlete that you wouldn't be willing to provide for any student walking in that situation at the same time. If they're injured, we can do that. But they can't get special meals. They can't get anything. I mean, they get tuition. When you think about what we ask them to do, they are the ambassadors for the university. Think about the large universities. You think about Auburn, you think about Georgia. You don't think about their English program. Okay? And people are assessing the value of the school in many cases by these ambassadors that are out there every day representing the university. What do they get in return? Ironically, the group on campus most similar to athletics are the people in music on our campus.
Oh, yeah.
They're highly recruited from all over the nation, sometimes all over the world, heavily dependent on scholarships for almost all of their performers, and they all have a specific skill that we're looking for. Okay, and we're not just letting anybody in. We actually have tryouts. And I mean, it's almost the exact same group or process. It's just with the NCAA, it's more regulated, which is really kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's a great parallel.
Yeah. I realized that you mentioned you had talked to Lisa Oberlander. I was listening to her speak one time where she talked about going out, recruiting. The limitations to her were the number of scholarships she had available to her, trying to find the best talents, competing with other schools. That's exactly what athletic coaches are doing.
Yeah.
They might not want to hear me say that, but I mean, it is a very similar process.
It is, and I think there's also similar tensions for the students about this particular area that they, have already, been identified as very skilled in and wanting to put a lot of their energy and effort in that area, and yet having a lot of other expectations about what it means to be a college student. Involved in that, and
finding time to participate in anything other than your performance, athletic or music, and classes. These kids aren't getting the full experience, which is something Division II has been trying to look at. And they don't have time to serve on the Student Government Association. They don't have time to go to all of these different extracurricular events. I mean, they can't travel internationally if it's during their season. Because it takes them away from practice, and could threaten their scholarship money for the next year. So really, they really cost them a lot, other than financially, to perform for us.
Yeah. Do you think though, like in some kind of idealized student athlete sense, their undergraduate academic experience is enhanced by being an athlete?
Most of them will say that it is. I mean, they get to interact with a very close group of people. They have that. They have other people they have close contact with to associate with the university. One of the things that they talk about with retention is having some kind of strong connection to the university. They have a powerful connection to the university. I mean, we identify them with the university.
They have to walk around with our suits on all the time.
And I mean, even now, a couple of the coaches are making them wear T-shirts that are essentially, announcement boards saying, we got a game today. Please come out and watch us. So, they are a part of the cog. It's just one of those things. They're part of the machine. So, they really have. But on the other hand, they're also some of our best performing students. Every year I do a report that compares the GPA of student athletes with the GPA of other students, also graduation rate, retention rates. They always outpace the regular students in GPA and progression. It's not because they're getting, we've got several biology majors who are student athletes. There are chemistry majors, psychology majors, in our college. There are musicians that are student athletes. They're more committed to maintaining their academics, mostly because I guess that they don't do that, they're going to lose their scholarship, they're going to lose their eligibility to play.
Well, that's right. That's a pretty powerful incentive. I mean, I sort of like in particular the less, I don't know, what would you call them? The sports that are a little bit less high profile, lower profile. They seem to me, I don't know, sort of more genuinely in the spirit of the scholar athlete who is pursuing, I don't know, a sport that there will probably not be a professional career waiting for them afterwards for the pure love of the game. And
then it turns out that one of the tasks, something the NCAA has been trying to do, is to convince the student athletes that even if you are in one of those high-profile sports, and even if you are moderately successful, the chances of you ever actually making that your profession is so small.
Yeah.
You try to convince them, fine, pursue that, but get your degree first.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you complete the degree, at least you'll have that to continue with, even if the athletics don't work out. So that's been a big drive. Degree program.
In this last part of our conversation, Glenn and I discussed the value of quality of life in a mid-sized city and what's kept him in Columbus. So this morning in the New York Times, there was a provocative op-ed about is it immoral to watch the Super Bowl? Given what we know about the violence of the game and the damage it's doing to players' brains. Do you have a position on football these days?
You know, I've known it's been violent. I mean, I grew up in the North. I had a lot of friends who played hockey. 2/3 of them were missing teeth. I mean, and they knew that if they went in there, and at that time they didn't wear helmets. I mean, which is just absolutely insane. And of course, they try to develop rules to protect the players, but the players going in knew that was a risk. And there's just so much you can do. I mean, at some point, people have to accept responsibility for what they choose to do. I mean, I work with poisonous snakes and alligators, and I recognize that I can get badly hurt doing it, but I'm not going to blame somebody else 10 years from now if I paralyze my left arm with a venom bite because no one said to me, you know, I mean, I knew. I had, you used informed consent on that. And so there's a certain limit to what I think. I don't think it's immoral. I mean, most of them are college educated, at least for a few years. They're not dumb people. Most athletes are very bright, and they know what they're getting into. Yeah. Can I blame them for trying to get some money after the fact? No, why not? There's plenty of it out there in professional sports, but they should certainly get a bigger share of it. But no, I don't think it's immoral. Yeah. There's so many other things. I mean, I think dogfighting is immoral because they don't have a choice. Right. I mean, that's immoral. Right. Right.
Well, it was clearly, a provocative op-ed. It's an issue out there.
It makes for an interesting discussion, but like I said, I get kind of cold-hearted. You read these reports about people who'll go climbing a mountain that 20 people told them was dangerous. They'd probably get stuck up there. There's a blizzard coming in. And we risked the life of rescuers to save them because everything everybody expected came true. Yeah, Oh, gosh.
I don't know if you remember the John Krakauer book, Into Thin Air. It was about the Everest expedition in the 90s where several people died in a snowstorm. It's a terrible story because...
Actually, I read that book now that you say that.
I mean, the people who, and their sort of entitled expectations about being able to summit that mountain with the help of the Sherpas.
Yes.
Right?
Like, and they're going to save them. Yeah,
who are going to carry all of their computer equipment so that they can be, in touch with their people at home the whole way. It's pretty stunning.
Yeah.
But anyway, all right. So that was a tangent from teaching and learning.
Yeah, that's fine.
So all right. So
not really, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's just a related tangent. Yeah. So another thing that I was curious about, because I'm having this personal kind of reflection moment in my life at this point, is how having your own children as college students changes your perspective on the business in any way. I mean, when your kids started going to college, were there any, eye-opening moments, or did it change the way you approached what we do in any way?
Actually, no.
No?
Yeah. It really didn't. I was delighted that they wanted to go to college, and I was delighted they both had the ability to go to college. I remember when my son, he said he wanted to go into engineering. I said, great. And he wanted to go to Georgia Tech, but he said, I don't want to go up there right now. He said, I'm just going to do that 2 + 2 from Columbus State. And I said, no problem. We're putting you in the dorm.
Yeah.
That's part of the college experience, is you don't stay at home with mom and dad. We're not doing your laundry. Go and be a student. And that's what he did. I mean, he lived in the dorm for 2 years. He did great. I mean, he did the things you'd expect college students to do. And, it gave me the perspective of worrying about whether or not he was attending classes at 8 o'clock in the morning or whatever. But as for the way I deliver things and perceive students, not really.
Yeah.
But
yeah. I think I became a better advisor.
Oh.
Because I think I tended to see that as, buddy, this is your responsibility. I'm, here to help you, but this is your ball game, man. And then when I had the opportunity to think of my own little lost sheep out there, hoping some faculty member might take mercy on him and, help him figure out what he needed to know, I think I increased my compassion level just a tad.
Now, when Bobby was going here, I was up in the dean's office, and so I intentionally tried to stay completely out of his business. I didn't want any faculty member feeling like they had to do something different, because I was there. It was kind of a sink or swim, and fortunately he did fine while he was here. My daughter went straight to Georgia Tech when she got out of high school. Like I said, they had very similar experiences while they were living in the dorms that I had going through, and my parents didn't get involved with me. I'm not a helicopter parent at all.
I'm not either.
And if when they were in public school and the principals would call and say, we got a problem with your son, I immediately assumed they were right. I wasn't one of those people that immediately assumed my son or daughter was right. But,
absolutely. I'm there. If there was some sort of problem with a homework or some gripe they had about a project, I was not getting involved. I said, this is between you and your teacher. You got to work this out, and I assume that the teacher is the person who's in the right until shown otherwise. But
we had a couple of incidents when they were going to school. We gave them advice, but other than that, and knowing they both went to a state school, so I knew what state policies were. And, I could provide them things that most kids weren't aware of, like the fact that my daughter, they both went into technology, and it turns out the state has a very nice program for providing computer software and computer peripherals and for students at near wholesale prices. Most kids don't know that's even available to them. Certainly our students here don't know.
Well, there's some definite pluses to being a faculty kid, I think. Well, it's interesting to me, just I don't know, just to see colleagues, children, and have the experience of colleagues, spouses teaching in the K-12 schools, and and we've got a tight little community here in a lot of ways.
We really do, and there are a lot of connections. The number of times that people have said, "Oh, I know you. My mother had."
Oh,
now
yeah.
it's gotten to the point. My mother had you back when she got her nursing degree back in 1984. It's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And here you are in college. What's
Yeah.
that make me besides old?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that about
Yeah.
Columbus, though. Well, so that leads me to actually just my last couple of questions.
Okay.
Because you have invested so much of your professional life in Columbus State University, what are your hopes and dreams for it in the future?
Boy, that's a good question.
I mean, where would you like us to be in 10 years?
For me, and I came in not early on, but we were a 4-year school when I got here, but it's watching the evolution of the university.
Mm-hmm.
It was a 2-year school, and then it got 4-year status, and it was earlier in the middle of that process. We were just forming colleges at the time when I came. Actually, they were schools at the time when I got here, and Frank Brown's efforts to get us recognized as a university and everything that goes along with that, and residence life, and the growth of degrees, shifting away from. We used to have a lot of 2-year degree programs. I'm thinking about things like dental hygiene, and we had a 2-year nursing program, and working away from those, shifting more to 4-year with more and more master's degree programs on the end. And now with the doctorate program and education, I see us heading in that. And I'd like to see us I don't want to say become more elite, but become a more competitive university where we're less of an open access on one end and more of an advance, providing that opportunity here. Columbus Technical College is providing a lot of that open access opportunity that we used to provide. Now they're offering 2-year degree programs, so I don't feel guilty losing that mission. But I would like to see. I'm not a real proponent of uncontrolled growth. I can see the advantage to that. But as you grow, it costs more to run the university. It's not like there's a net savings. I'd like to see us, kind of like the Georgia College and State University model, where you increase your admissions requirements, have this ability to do more in smaller environments with the students, more interaction, maybe really hone into some really good, strong master's degree programs, and then as those grow, look at more doctoral programs. I really would like to see us continue to head in that direction. As I said, I see the place for it, but in my mind, I don't see where online learning is going to be a big part of that mission. I think online is great for people in certain populations, but certainly from my experiences, freshmen and sophomores probably shouldn't be allowed in them. But for adult learners, for a lot of our graduate programs, I think it's an excellent opportunity. Because they are self-motivated and self-driven, and you can give them assignments that they will do more than just the absolute minimum to get it back to you by a certain deadline. I think it's kind of tailor-made for them. Yeah.
Well, we really are, I think, sort of learning as we go with the online situation. And I know every year it feels like students get a little bit more savvy about what's involved, and the university's getting a little more savvy about who to target these things for. And the studies that I've seen suggest that your traditional aged freshmen and sophomores, they don't want an online class anyway. That's not really their preferred method.
It's funny you say that, because I've been at several meetings around the state. Now that I'm teaching a larger class, I've taken several of those faculty development opportunities they've had for the faculty within the system. And at several of them, they say, well, this is how students don't learn the way they used to learn. Students learn, that they've got their smartphones, they've got their laptops, they've got their tablets. Students aren't learning the way. And I thought to myself, my kids, okay, they've been out of school for about 8 years, but I also have lots of friends with kids that are still in the schools, and they're still learning the same way they were before. They're still going in and sitting in the classroom with a faculty member driving the curriculum. They do homework every night. Not all of them can afford smartphones. Matter of fact, most of them, or probably half of them, at certain levels don't have them at all available to them. So I don't think that end of it is developing that quickly, especially with a lot of our students who are maybe first-time college students, maybe not being that savvy or having that technology available to them.
Right.
So I think maybe focusing in on traditional, recognize that technology is a tool.
Right.
It's not what we're teaching. Right. I mean, every time something new comes out, I remember when they came out with whiteboards. That was the thing.
Right.
The whole class became about learning how to use a whiteboard, and the actual content became secondary.
Right.
I think like with a lot of that technology, it's kind of mellowed out. People recognize that it's a good tool.
Right.
But that's true with all that technology.
No, you're right. I mean, I think the bells and whistles were sort of, bright, shiny objects everyone was getting distracted with.
Right.
And when you come right down to it, I mean, I would like to see there be a sort of fuzzier line between traditional classroom teaching and online teaching, and that the whole point is, how are we learning this well and deeply and effectively, and not so much what bells and whistles are we using to do it with.
I like the idea, and I've played with the idea of developing some more blended type of classes where there's a lot where the technology becomes supplemental. It replaces a little bit of the. I mean, I'm a performer. I love standing in front of a classroom. There's nothing I like more than getting up there and sharing what I know. And I do get excited, and I hope the students get engaged by it. But I also recognize that there are other people learn other ways than just hearing me talk. And so having something available to them, a lot of textbooks are providing stuff, but a lot of that's very canned. So it'd be nice. It'd be great if you could, find someone else teaching a similar course at another university and have some kind of a shared experience between the two classes of students. I think would be great. Somehow, different perspectives.
And there is something irreplaceable about that personal, the personal component. Right. Even if it's in a sort of unidirectional way, in that you're lecturing, there's something important that's about that connection, that you can make eye contact with people, and they're free to raise their hands if they're on the spot if they want to. And
that's the thing is, even if it's a stupid question, the fact that they feel free to ask a question and you can respond to it right then. I mean, even if you're online, you can provide opportunities for interaction, but it's not as spontaneous. I mean, they were off doing something on their own. It'd be great if they actually made the effort to say, well, maybe I'll try to look that up on my own and get the answer myself. But the nice thing about a classroom environment is that immediate interaction and response to questions and problems. And you can even see students that are just kind of like when the dog goes, you kind of catch on that they're missing something. Maybe you should go back and, or you ask a question and nobody even thinks about responding to you, then you realize you've lost the entire class. It's time to go back and take another shot at it. But
that's right. Let me try that question a different way.
Let's take a different approach on that one.
All right, so here's just out of left field about our town, our university. What's the best kept secret? What's somebody that people ought to know more about?
I think it's not any one thing. I think it's almost like Columbus is a microcosm of a big city. Because we've got one of everything. If you think about it. I spent a couple of weekends ago, Laura and I went up to Chattanooga. We spent a weekend up there just tooling around, seeing what they had, realizing that we have a lot. I mean, they have a beautiful aquarium. By the way, probably the best aquarium in the region. Sorry, Atlanta. But they have an outstanding aquarium. And then you look at the things that have developed around that. But then when you look at Columbus, we have the symphony. We've got the theater. We've got the ballet. We've got good shopping with one of every major outlet. We've got good food. We've got a good educational system. It's got not as much diversity as Atlanta, but we've got one of everything that's good. I mean, we've got whitewater rafting. We've got the National Infantry. We have a little bit of everything. So there's always something going on. I mean, they're expanding the bike trails. It's that microcosm, and we're isolated from any other big city. You know, growing up in New England, it was an hour to anywhere. I mean, you could get to, you know, in a few hours, you go from New York to Boston, you know, then the mountains of Maine. And here, it's not so much. I mean, you get outside the city limits, and then there's nothing for 90 miles.
Yeah.
And so having everything here,
yeah,
and, you know, I think, you know, the support of the community, the town, for the city. People are invested in the city. They feel an ownership. I think that's great. It's not like people feel invested in one part of the city.
Yeah.
You know, in Boston, there are people in the north side North End that are only interested in the North End. There are people in Cambridge that are only interested in that type of thing.
Yeah.
Here, it's kind of a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what Laura and I were kind of attracted to, coming from Milledgeville, which had nothing, to here. It's almost like a college town where everything develops around, but it wasn't just us. We're just part of that puzzle.
Yeah, I agree. I love that about having the kinds of activities that you could find in Atlanta. It's just a smaller scale.
Yeah.
So unless for you, the major thrill of it is to say, look at me with these other thousands of people.
Right,
I mean, you can still enjoy all of those events just on a more intimate level. In some ways, I might prefer that, really. Yeah,
my brother, he lives in the Boston area. He drives every day, hour and a half each way to work.
Ooh.
Home and back. So 3 hours on the road. It takes me 3 minutes. When I miss that one traffic light, I go out of my mind. I mean, it's just everything is right here. It's available. You know, it's I mean, it's nice. It's compact, but you're still only 90 minutes from Atlanta if you want that type of experience.
I agree. It's really got a lot of lifestyle quality.
Yeah. Well, we thought, you know, when Laura came down here, she said, 2 years. That's it. Then we're out of here. And we got to Columbus, and it's kind of engaging. I mean, she started working at a Houston clinic and got to know a lot of the people in the community through that, and just loved it.
Well, we're lucky to have had you both.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time.
I'm glad to.
And,